There are no coincidences in your life. You are not here by accident. You did not randomly stop at this moment. Your consciousness moved. And when consciousness moves, reality rearranges itself to match it. The world does not operate on chance. It operates on assumption. You do not attract what you want. You do not attract what you beg for. You attract what you accept as true about yourself. If these words are in front of you, it is because something inside you has shifted. Maybe you cannot explain it yet. Maybe you cannot articulate it clearly, but you have grown tired of the old narrative. You have begun to question the limits you once accepted. And the instant that questioning began, your state began to change. Reality is not selecting you, it is reflecting you. What appears before you is always in harmony with what you are conscious of being. The outer world has no independent will. It has no agenda of its own. It simply echoes the inner arrangement of your beliefs. If you believe you are overlooked, you will find proof of being overlooked. If you believe you are misunderstood, you will encounter misunderstanding. If you believe you are chosen, life will organize itself in ways that confirm that belief. The world does not debate with you. It responds with agreement. It says yes to your dominant assumption. Most people live as effects. They speak about circumstances as if circumstances have authority. They blame timing, other people, the economy, their past. They place cause outside themselves and then wonder why nothing changes. But the moment you suspect that you are the cause, everything begins to shift. If you are the cause of what has been, then you are also the cause of what can be. This is not about guilt. It is about power. Blame keeps you small. Responsibility makes you sovereign. Your consciousness is the creative center. The external world is the screen. You are not a spectator in this theater of experience. You are the projector. Every repeated thought, every accepted belief, every emotion you continuously entertain is a film being played. The screen has no choice but to display what is fed into it. You may attempt to change the screen. You may change jobs, cities, partners, strategies, but if the internal script remains the same, the scenes will repeat with different actors. The pattern will persist because the assumption persists, and you have seen the patterns. The same type of disappointment, the same form of conflict, the same ceiling you cannot seem to break. This is not punishment, it is reflection. Life is faithful to your self-concept. If you assume that success requires struggle, you will create struggle as a condition for success. If you assume that love leaves, you will unconsciously reproduce separation. The world is loyal to the identity you hold. Something in you has begun to reject the old identity. That is why you are here. No one awakens out of curiosity. Awakening begins when the old version becomes unbearable. There is a silent decision that forms first. A quiet declaration that says enough. Enough of repeating. Enough of shrinking. Enough of living as a reaction instead of a cause. And when that internal decision crystallizes, even slightly, the mirror begins to move. You think you are searching for answers. In truth, you are transitioning into a new state. And when a state changes, perception changes. You begin to notice what was always available but previously invisible. You encounter conversations that resonate. You pause at moments that feel significant. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because you did. If you were still anchored in the former version of yourself, you would have scrolled past this without recognition. It would have felt irrelevant, but you did not scroll. You stopped. That pause reveals more than you realize. It reveals alignment. It reveals readiness. It reveals that your inner arrangement is no longer identical to who you were. The law is simple. Consciousness is the only reality. What you are conscious of being determines what you experience. This is not poetry. It is structure. If you accept yourself as limited, life will outline your limits. If you accept yourself as evolving, life will introduce expansion. If you accept yourself as powerless, circumstances will appear dominant. If you accept yourself as the operant power, circumstances will reorganize. The outer world cannot contradict your dominant state for long. Temporary fluctuations may occur, but sustained experience always conforms to sustained identity. The question is never whether reality is responding. It always is. The question is what you are consistently assuming about yourself. Right now, in this moment, you are radiating a concept of self. That concept is selecting experiences, drawing patterns, filtering perception. It is the invisible architecture behind every visible event. You are not waiting for life to begin. Life is continuously beginning from you. There are no random encounters. There are only states meeting their reflections. The fact that you are here confirms that an internal redefinition has already started. A new self-concept is forming. And once a new self-concept stabilizes, the world must comply. You are not becoming something different by accident. You are remembering that you have always been the source. The moment you accept that you are the cause, not the effect, the structure of your reality begins to loosen, and what once felt fixed becomes fluid. Nothing about this is coincidence. It is correspondence, and you have already stepped into the correspondence of a different version of yourself. You do not attract what you desire. You attract what you assume to be true about yourself. Desire by itself has no creative power. Longing does not manifest. Wishing does not transform. Assumption does. What you consistently accept as fact within your own consciousness hardens into experience. The world is not responding to your words. It is responding to your identity. If you desire wealth but assume you are someone who struggles, struggle will accompany every opportunity. If you desire love but assume you are unworthy, distance will follow every connection. If you desire recognition but assume you are invisible, invisibility will shape your environment. The outer world is obedient to your inner verdict. It does not evaluate your potential. It reflects your acceptance. Assumption is not a surface thought. It is not a sentence you repeat once and forget. It is the quiet certainty beneath your reactions. It is the internal position from which you interpret events. When something happens, your immediate interpretation reveals your assumption. If a door closes and you instantly think this always happens to me, you are witnessing your own creative command. If a delay occurs and you interpret it as protection or redirection, you are issuing a different command. The event itself is neutral. Your assumption assigns meaning. Meaning solidifies into pattern. Most people attempt to change outcomes without changing identity. They attempt techniques without altering self-concept. They visualize abundance while secretly identifying as lacking. They affirm confidence while inwardly rehearsing insecurity. This internal contradiction produces unstable results. Temporary shifts may occur, but the dominant assumption eventually restores the familiar pattern. Reality returns to match the deeper identity. Your assumption about yourself precedes every experience. Before anyone treats you a certain way, you have already defined yourself in relation to them. Before money flows or stalls, you have already defined your relationship with it. Before opportunity expands or contracts, you have already accepted a version of yourself capable or incapable of holding it. Nothing external initiates your identity. Identity initiates what is external. You may say you want change. The question is not what you want. The question is who you believe you are. If you believe you are someone who must prove, you will encounter situations demanding proof. If you believe you are someone who must fight, you will encounter resistance. If you believe you are someone who is chosen, supported, aligned, life will arrange confirmations. The law of assumption is exact. It does not bend to emotion alone. It aligns with conviction. Conviction is sustained acceptance. When you consistently feel and think from a position, that position becomes your dwelling state, and your dwelling state becomes your reality. This is not mystical exaggeration. It is structural alignment. Consciousness expresses itself through form. Consider how effortlessly negative assumptions manifest. A person who assumes rejection will notice every slight glance, every delayed reply, every subtle shift in tone. Their perception filters for evidence. Their behavior subtly adjusts. Their energy communicates expectation. And soon, rejection appears. They call it bad luck. In truth, it is faithful reflection. The same mechanism works in your favor when directed intentionally. When you assume you are respected, You carry yourself differently. Your voice stabilizes. Your posture adjusts. Your decisions sharpen. Others respond to that unspoken certainty, not because you forced them, but because you shifted the state from which you interact. The world responds to who you are being. Assumption is not pretending. It is choosing a state and dwelling in it until it feels natural. It is accepting the end as already true. When you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you are not hoping. You are inhabiting. You are relocating your identity. And identity determines experience. Many wait for evidence before changing assumption. They say, once I see results, I will believe. But evidence follows assumption. It does not precede it. If you wait for proof, you remain bound to the current state. If you change the assumption first, proof must organize itself around it. The sequence cannot be reversed. You may not consciously declare your assumptions, but you demonstrate them daily. The way you speak about your future reveals your internal certainty. The way you react to obstacles reveals your self-concept. The way you interpret silence reveals your belief about your worth. Every reaction is a confession of identity to change your life. You do not wrestle with circumstances. You redefine yourself. You ask, who am I assuming myself to be? Am I assuming I am limited by history? Am I assuming I am bound by past mistakes? Am I assuming I must earn everything through struggle? Or am I willing to assume that I am already the version capable of the life I desire? The world cannot override your assumption. It can only echo it. If you consistently accept that you are expanding, growth will appear. If you consistently accept that you are supported, support will materialize. If you consistently accept that you are guided, direction will emerge. The external arrangement will always mirror the internal agreement. There is no partial application of this law. Every assumption operates. The only question is whether it operates unconsciously or deliberately. When unconscious, it feels like fate. When deliberate, it feels like creation. Right now, you are assuming something about yourself. That assumption is active. It is selecting outcomes, shaping perception, arranging interactions. You are not neutral. You are broadcasting a self-concept. If you wish to alter what appears, alter what you accept. Accept a different identity. Dwell in it mentally. Feel from it. Decide from it. React from it. The world will have no choice but to reflect it. Desire whispers what is possible. Assumption declares what is real. And reality follows the declaration. You are not the effect of circumstances. You are the cause of them. This is the line that separates the unconscious from the awakened. As long as you believe the world is happening to you, you remain bound to reaction. The moment you accept that the world is happening through you, authority returns to its rightful place. Most people live in reaction. They wake up and check for evidence of how they should feel. They observe bank accounts before deciding their worth. They observe messages before deciding their desirability. They observe outcomes before deciding their capability. In doing so, they surrender creative power to appearances. They let the mirror define the face. But the mirror has no initiative. It cannot initiate an image. It can only reflect what stands before it. Circumstances are the same. They have no independent authorship. They echo the state you occupy. When you react as though they are the cause, you reinforce their authority. When you recognize them as reflection, you reclaim authorship. Being the cause does not mean controlling every movement of the external world. It means understanding that your state determines how the external world arranges itself around you. Your dominant identity acts like gravity. It pulls experiences into alignment with it. If you identify as overlooked, you gravitate towards situations that confirm it. If you identify as favored, you gravitate toward confirmation of favor. The difference between reaction and causation is subtle but absolute. Reaction says this happened, therefore I feel this. Causation says I am this, therefore events will align accordingly. One position waits, the other declares. One position negotiates with appearances, the other instructs them. When you assume you are the cause, you stop chasing validation. You stop pleading with outcomes. You stop asking the world for permission to feel secure. Instead, You define security internally. You define worth internally. You define direction internally. The external world then reorganizes to match the definition. Consider how quickly moods spread into experience. If you wake with irritation and carry it unconsciously, you notice more inconvenience. You interpret neutral actions as disrespect. You anticipate friction and encounter it. The day seems to confirm your mood, but the mood preceded the confirmation. The internal climate shaped perception, behavior, tone, and response. Cause and effect were inverted in your awareness, but not in reality. Now reverse it deliberately. Assume calm before the day begins. Assume alignment before evidence appears. Assume that interactions will unfold in your favor. You are not denying possibility of contrast. You are choosing the lens through which contrast is interpreted, and interpretation determines experience. Being the cause requires responsibility at the level of thought and feeling. It requires awareness of the stories you repeat. When something does not go as expected, the unconscious reaction is to assign blame. They did this. That ruined it. Timing was wrong. But the creative position asks a different question. What state was I occupying? What identity was active? What assumption was guiding my perception? This is not about self-condemnation. It is about self-authority. If you are the cause, you are never powerless. Even when conditions seem rigid, your state remains fluid. And when your state shifts consistently, conditions eventually yield. There will be moments when the old pattern attempts to assert itself. A familiar disappointment may appear. A delay may surface. In those moments, the temptation is to revert to reaction, to say this always happens, to conclude that nothing changed. But persistence in a new identity requires refusing that conclusion. It requires recognizing that appearances lag behind assumption. The mirror reflects with delay, but it must reflect. You do not force the world into submission. You redefine yourself and allow the world to conform. When you define yourself as someone who is respected, you do not demand respect anxiously. You embody it. Your speech shifts. Your posture shifts. Your boundaries clarify. Others respond accordingly, not because you manipulated them, but because you stopped presenting yourself as lesser. Cause is silent confidence. Effect is defensive explanation. When you know you are the origin, you do not argue with reflection. You adjust the source. You do not fight the shadow. You move the object, casting it. Many misunderstand this and attempt to control every detail. They obsess over specific outcomes and monitor every fluctuation. That is still reaction disguised as control. True causation is internal stability. It is sustained identification with the version of yourself you choose to be, regardless of temporary contradiction. If you accept yourself as the operant power, you do not collapse at the first sign of opposition. You understand that opposition is the echo of a previous state dissolving. You remain aligned with the chosen identity. You remain faithful to the inner declaration, and gradually, inevitably, reality adjusts. The world cannot permanently contradict your sustained self-concept. It may test it. It may appear to challenge it. But sustained identity prevails over temporary circumstance. What you consistently are in consciousness becomes what you consistently encounter in form. You are not here to manage appearances. You are here to originate them. Every thought you dwell in is a directive. Every feeling you sustain is a blueprint. Every assumption you normalize is a command. When you shift from effect to cause, you no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" You ask, "What am I being?" And that question returns you to power. You are not a fragment in someone else's design. You are the center of your own projection. Accept that, and the structure of your experience begins to reorganize around your awareness. You are the cause, and what you are willing to assume about yourself will determine what follows. The world is a screen. You are the projector. Nothing you see has independent origin. Every scene, every interaction, every triumph, every conflict is light, shaped by the film you carry within. Most people attempt to polish the screen. They try to rearrange circumstances, negotiate behavior, force outcomes. They argue with reflections, But a reflection has no power to change itself. It can only display what is projected. When you understand that the outer world is a screen, you stop fighting shadows. You stop blaming characters in the scene. You recognize that what appears is an echo of an inner script. The script is not written once. It is written daily through repetition of identity. What you repeatedly tell yourself about who you are becomes the film that runs continuously. If you see limitation, examine the script. If you see rejection, examine the script. If you see stagnation, examine the script. The screen is never the source. It is evidence. Evidence does not initiate. It confirms. Most remain trapped because they try to correct the evidence instead of rewriting the script. They attempt new strategies while holding the same self-concept. They attempt new relationships while assuming the same insecurities. They attempt new ventures while secretly expecting failure. Then they are surprised when the scenes feel familiar. Familiarity is not coincidence. It is continuity of projection. You may say that the world feels solid, that circumstances feel real and fixed. They feel real because you are immersed in the projection. But immersion does not equal origin. When you enter a theater, the story on the screen can move you, frighten you, excite you, yet you never forget that the images are light shaped by a source behind you. Consciousness is that source. Your identity is the film. Every belief you normalize is a frame. Every assumption you accept is a sequence. When frames repeat, a narrative forms. That narrative becomes your lived experience. If you believe you are someone who struggles, the film arranges scenes of struggle. If you believe you are someone who thrives, the film arranges scenes of expansion. The screen does not question the film. It renders it faithfully. Changing the screen without changing the film is futile. You can demand better treatment, but if you assume you are undervalued, subtle behaviors will reinforce that assumption. You can pursue abundance, but if you assume money is scarce or unstable, patterns will arise that confirm scarcity. The outer rearranges temporarily, but the dominant film reasserts itself. To change what you see, you must change what you are conscious of being. This is not surface affirmation. It is internal redefinition. You ask yourself, who am I in relation to this area of life? Am I the one who is overlooked? Am I the one who must prove? Am I the one who waits? Or am I the one who is chosen, aligned, supported? The moment you redefine that identity, the film changes. The screen may not shift instantly, but it has no choice but to update. Projection cannot contradict source indefinitely. If you persist in the new identity, the scenes will gradually reorganize. There will be a period where old frames attempt to continue. You may see remnants of the former script. This is the lag between projection and full rendering. If you misinterpret this lag as failure, you revert to the old film. If you understand it as transition, you remain steady. Stability in identity is what finalizes the shift. You are not at the mercy of images. You are the origin of them. This recognition dissolves resentment. It dissolves blame. It dissolves the illusion that others hold creative authority over your experience. Others appear in your projection according to the roles implied by your self-concept. If you assume you are not heard, others will mirror inattentiveness. If you assume you are respected, interactions align accordingly. The screen does not choose the characters. The film does. If a pattern of conflict appears repeatedly with different individuals, it is not coincidence. It is consistency of script. Rewrite the script, and the casting changes. This does not mean you ignore behavior. It means you recognize its origin. When something displeasing appears, instead of asking, why is this happening, you ask, what assumption is active? What identity is being expressed? This question returns you to authorship. Many fear this level of responsibility because it removes excuses. If the world is the screen, you cannot blame it for showing what you project. But within that responsibility lies freedom. If you projected the past unconsciously, you can project the future deliberately. Projection is constant. Even now you are casting images into experience. Your reactions, your expectations, your silent conclusions are frames being added. If you assume that nothing ever changes for you, The film will ensure continuity. If you assume that change is already unfolding, the film will begin composing scenes that align. You do not wait for the screen to inspire confidence. You cultivate confidence, and the screen reflects it. You do not wait for validation to feel worthy. You feel worthy, and validation appears. The direction is always from within outward. The world is not against you. It is obedient to you, not to your surface desires, but to your accepted identity. When you understand that the screen is neutral, you stop reacting emotionally to every image. You observe, adjust the source, and allow the next sequence to render. You are standing before your own projection at all times. Nothing more, nothing less. If you want a different picture, become a different projector. If you want a different storyline, assume a different role. The screen will not resist. It cannot. It has no will separate from the film, and the film is yours to redefine. Everyone in your life is you pushed out. This is not metaphor. It is structure. The people you meet, the way they respond, the tone they use, the roles they play are shaped by the concept you hold of yourself in relation to them. They are not independent causes in your story. They are participants in a projection that originates within you. When you assume you are not valued, others will unconsciously mirror disregard. When you assume you are difficult to love, love will feel unstable. When you assume you must compete for attention, you will experience rivalry. It will seem as if their behavior is initiating your feeling. In truth, your identity is selecting their behavior. This does not mean that others lack autonomy in their own experience. It means that within your reality, they appear according to the state you occupy. Your world is organized around your consciousness. Their role in your story reflects your assumption about yourself. If you repeatedly encounter the same dynamic with different people, the common denominator is not them. It is the self-concept you carry. If authority figures always seem dismissive, examine your internal belief about your worth in authority structures. If romantic partners seem distant, examine your belief about your desirability. The pattern is not coincidence. It is coherence between identity and interaction. Most people attempt to change others. They argue, persuade, defend, withdraw. They treat behavior as the cause, but behavior is the echo. If you change the self-concept from which you relate, behavior shifts. When you redefine yourself as respected, you stop presenting yourself apologetically. Your tone stabilizes, your boundaries clarify, your reactions calm. Others respond to that shift without knowing why. If you assume you are chosen, conversations align differently. If you assume you are heard, your voice carries differently. If you assume you are supported, cooperation appears more frequently. You are not forcing them. You are adjusting the lens through which they are perceived and engaged. This principle also explains conflict. When you feel triggered, you are witnessing a reflection of an internal wound or belief. The trigger is not random. It is aligned with a concept you hold. If you believe you are easily replaced, small signs of independence in others may feel threatening. If you believe you are secure, the same signs feel neutral. The external action may be identical. The internal assumption determines the emotional reaction. To change the dynamic, you do not confront the mirror. You redefine yourself. You ask, who am I being in this interaction? Am I assuming inferiority? Am I assuming rejection? Am I assuming I must earn basic regard? Once you identify the assumption, you release it and adopt a new one deliberately. Adopting a new assumption requires persistence. If you have identified as undervalued for years, the first shift may feel unnatural. The mind will attempt to reference past evidence. It will say this is not realistic. But realism is based on past projection. If you want a different future, you cannot anchor identity to prior reflection. When you assume you are inherently valued, you do not wait for confirmation. You embody it. You do not seek excessive reassurance. You do not over-explain. You do not chase. Your presence changes. Others adapt because the role you unconsciously assigned them has changed. Even in painful relationships, the law remains consistent. If you assume you are powerless in love, you will experience control. If you assume you are equal and worthy, the dynamic recalibrates. If it does not, the role dissolves and a new one appears. The projection cannot sustain a character inconsistent with your new identity. Forgiveness becomes natural when you understand this structure. You stop seeing others as enemies. You see them as reflections of a previous assumption. You release resentment because you recognize that the state has shifted. Holding resentment would mean holding the old identity in place. This does not excuse harmful behavior. It clarifies its origin. You are not required to tolerate what does not align with your chosen identity, but you respond from authorship, not from victimhood. You recognize that the role someone played corresponded to the state you once held. You shift the state, and the casting changes. There will be moments when the old version attempts to reappear. Someone may behave in a way that resembles the former pattern. In that moment, you choose whether to re-enter the old identity or remain in the new one. Reaction reactivates the previous script. Stability in the new self-concept gradually eliminates the outdated role. You do not need to monitor others obsessively. You monitor yourself. You refine the concept you hold. You strengthen the identity you choose. The world adjusts accordingly. Everyone in your life is a messenger of your assumption. They reveal what you believe about yourself. If you see disrespect, examine where you have disrespected your own worth. If you see abandonment, examine where you have abandoned your own standards. The mirror is precise. When you fully accept that others reflect your self-concept, you stop attempting to control their reactions. You control your identity. You redefine yourself as the one who is secure, valued, aligned, and gradually, inevitably, the interactions confirm the redefinition. You are not surrounded by independent forces determining your experience. You are surrounded by reflections responding to your internal arrangement. Change the arrangement, and the reflection reorganizes. Everyone is you pushed out, and what you assume about yourself will determine how they appear in your world. Feeling is the secret. Words do not create. Rituals do not create. Effort alone does not create. Feeling creates. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is the only creative act. Everything else is preparation or resistance. You may repeat affirmations for hours, but if the feeling beneath them is doubt, doubt is what manifests. You may visualize success, but if the dominant emotion is anxiety about not having it, anxiety becomes the command. The creative power does not respond to language. It responds to state, and state is defined by feeling. Feeling is not surface emotion. It is not excitement or intensity alone. It is the inner conviction that something is already true. It is the calm certainty of possession. When you feel as though something is done, your nervous system shifts. Your posture shifts. Your reactions shift. You are no longer chasing. You are embodying. Most people attempt to manifest from longing. Longing reinforces absence. When you long, you affirm that the desire is not yet yours. The feeling of lack dominates, and the world faithfully mirrors that lack. When you assume the feeling of fulfillment, you eliminate the gap. There is no distance between you and the desire. There is only identity. To feel the wish fulfilled means you move internally to the end. You stop thinking about how it will happen. You stop measuring when it will happen. You enter the state of the version of yourself for whom it has already happened. That version is not anxious. That version is not pleading. That version is stable. If you desire financial freedom, imagine how you would feel if it were already secured. Not exaggerated excitement, not disbelief, but quiet relief. Stability, confidence in decision-making, the ability to think long-term. That emotional tone is the state you must occupy now. When you feel it consistently, your behavior aligns. Your perception sharpens. Opportunities that match the state become visible. If you desire love, imagine how you would feel if you were already cherished. Not obsession, not tension, but warmth, ease, a sense of belonging. When you feel that now, you stop searching from emptiness. You interact from wholeness. That shift alone reorganizes how others respond. Feeling is the bridge between imagination and physical expression. Imagination plants the seed. Feeling waters it. Without feeling, imagination remains abstract. With feeling, imagination becomes embodied reality. There will be moments when the external world contradicts the new feeling. Old evidence may appear. Delays may surface. This is the test of stability. If you abandon the fulfilled feeling at the first contradiction, you return to the former state. If you persist in the feeling regardless of temporary appearance, the external must adjust. Feeling is not forced positivity. It is chosen alignment. You may still experience momentary doubt or fear, but your dominant dwelling state remains fulfillment. When doubt appears, you do not wrestle with it aggressively. You simply return to the chosen state. You remind yourself who you are being. The body learns through repetition. If you repeatedly enter the feeling of completion, it becomes natural. What once felt imagined begins to feel familiar. Familiarity is powerful. The mind seeks coherence between inner familiarity and outer conditions. It will guide behavior in ways that match the internal state. Many attempt to control external steps obsessively. They strategize every detail. They monitor progress anxiously. That anxiety is a confession of non-possession. If you truly felt the wish fulfilled, you would move differently. Your actions would be confident rather than desperate. Your decisions would be deliberate rather than reactive. Feeling fulfilled does not eliminate action. It transforms it. You still act. You still decide. But action emerges from certainty rather than fear. The tone of movement changes, and tone determines outcome. When you feel secure, you negotiate differently. When you feel valued, you speak differently. When you feel abundant, you risk differently. The outer world responds not to your technique but to your state. Techniques without feeling are hollow. Feeling without technique still organizes technique naturally. The secret is consistency. One moment of feeling followed by hours of doubt weakens the projection. The dominant state always prevails. Ask yourself what you most consistently feel about the area you want to change. Is it hope mixed with fear? Is it desire mixed with frustration? Or is it quiet possession? You cannot deceive the creative power. It registers your true emotional baseline. That baseline becomes your reality. To alter reality, alter the baseline. Return again and again to the sensation of already being the person you wish to become. It may feel unfamiliar at first. That is natural. You are replacing an old emotional habit, but persistence rewires familiarity. Eventually, the fulfilled state feels more natural than the lacking state. At that point, manifestation accelerates. The world has no resistance because you have no internal contradiction. You are not waiting for something to arrive so that you can feel complete. You feel complete, and completion arrives in form. This is not reversal of logic. It is correction of it. Feeling is the command. Feeling is the blueprint. Feeling is the secret. Live from the end, not toward the end. This is where most fail. They think about the desire. They plan for the desire. They work toward the desire, but they do not live from it. And as long as you live towards something, you confirm that it is separate from you. Living toward the end keeps the desire in the future. Living from the end collapses the distance. When you live towards something, your thoughts sound like one day this will happen. I hope this works. I am trying to get there. Those sentences may feel motivated, but they are rooted in separation. They reinforce the idea that fulfillment is somewhere else. Living from the end changes the internal dialogue. It is not about pretending circumstances are different. It is about assuming the identity of the one for whom the desire is already realized. If the desire were fulfilled, how would you think? How would you interpret events? How would you carry yourself? That is the state you enter now. If you want to be successful, stop thinking like someone attempting success. Think like someone who has already integrated it. A successful identity does not panic at small obstacles. It does not interpret delay as failure. It does not seek constant reassurance. It moves with a baseline of certainty. When you live from that identity, behavior reorganizes automatically. If you want financial expansion, do not think as someone trying to escape debt. Think as someone who manages resources confidently. That person evaluates opportunities differently. That person does not react impulsively to temporary fluctuation. The difference is subtle but decisive. Living from the end shifts decision-making before results appear. If you want love, do not analyze every message from fear of loss. Analyze nothing. Feel chosen. Feel secure. The version of you who is already loved does not overinterpret silence. That version rests in belonging. When you live from that state, you stop broadcasting anxiety. You interact with calm presence. The external reflects the shift. Most wait for evidence before adopting the state. They say, when I see improvement, I will relax. When I receive confirmation, I will believe. That sequence keeps fulfillment postponed. Evidence follows state. State does not follow evidence. The moment you stabilize in the end, the bridge of events begins to form. The bridge of events is the natural unfolding between state and physical expression. It is not forced. It does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it appears ordinary. A conversation shifts. A random idea arises. An unexpected opportunity presents itself. From the outside, it may seem coincidental. From the inside, it is alignment. Living from the end does not mean ignoring reality. It means interpreting reality through the lens of completion. When something appears that contradicts your desire, you do not collapse into the old identity. You ask, how would the fulfilled version of me respond to this? That question re-anchors you. There will be a temptation to measure progress constantly. Measurement from anxiety reactivates separation. The fulfilled version does not monitor every fluctuation. It trusts continuity. Trust is not passivity. It is stability in identity. The mind may argue that this is unrealistic. It may present evidence from the past, but the past is only a record of previous states. If you want a different future, you cannot consult the old record as authority. You create a new record by embodying a new state now. Living from the end transforms time. The future stops feeling distant. It feels integrated. You stop chasing a version of yourself and start expressing it. The internal shift precedes the external proof. Once you are internally consistent, external proof becomes inevitable. This is not positive thinking. It is identity relocation. Positive thinking can exist on the surface while insecurity remains underneath. Living from the end replaces insecurity at the root. It replaces the sense of striving with the sense of being. Ask yourself in each area of desire, am I living toward it or from it? If you are living toward it, you are reinforcing absence. If you are living from it, you are stabilizing presence. The outer world cannot permanently contradict a stabilized identity. It may take time for visible rearrangement, but rearrangement must occur. Consciousness moves first. Form follows. Living from the end requires discipline of awareness. You observe your internal dialogue. When it drifts into waiting or doubting, you gently return to the state of completion, not forcefully, not anxiously, calmly. As someone who knows, you are not preparing to become, you are choosing to be. The difference defines everything. Preparation implies delay. Being implies arrival. When you live from the end, desire loses its desperation. It becomes natural. It feels inevitable, and inevitability is powerful. The world reorganizes around what you treat as inevitable. Stop moving toward fulfillment as if it is ahead of you. Stand in it internally. Think from it. Feel from it. Decide from it. The path will reveal itself under your feet. Time is not what you think it is. It is not a rigid line stretching from past to future. It is not a force that decides when you are ready. Time is a dimension within consciousness. It responds to state the same way circumstances do. What you call future is a probability aligned with your current identity. Change the identity, and the timeline shifts. Most people treat time as authority. They say it takes years. They say it is too late. They say they missed their chance. But those statements are assumptions about continuity. The past feels powerful only because you continue to identify with it. Memory is not destiny. It is evidence of previous states. If you maintain the same state, the future repeats the past. If you alter the state, the future diverges. You are not moving through time in the way you imagine. You are moving through states. Each state carries its own sequence of events. When you occupy a state consistently, you activate the corresponding chain of experiences. When you shift states, you shift trajectories. The outer world may appear gradual, but the inner shift is immediate. The delay between inner decision and outer confirmation is simply the rendering process. What you call waiting is often hesitation in identity. You may say you want change, yet you rehearse the same internal story. You revisit old disappointments. You define yourself by past outcomes. That repetition stabilizes the former timeline. To collapse time, you stop referencing the past as proof of limitation. You accept that the moment you assume a new identity, you have entered a different probability. There are infinite versions of you that exist as potential. The version who succeeded, the version who healed, the version who expanded. They are not ahead of you in linear sequence. They are parallel possibilities aligned with different states. When you change your self-concept, you tune to a different version. The shift may feel subtle, but it is decisive. Time collapses when certainty stabilizes. When you feel as though something is inevitable, you stop stretching it into distance. Doubt elongates timelines. Certainty compresses them. This does not mean events appear instantly in dramatic fashion. It means the internal resistance dissolves. Once resistance dissolves, movement accelerates. You have experienced this before. There were periods when everything seemed delayed. Effort felt heavy. Progress felt slow. That was not punishment. It was misalignment between desire and identity. Then there were moments when things aligned quickly. Opportunities appeared with minimal friction. Conversations unfolded naturally. That was alignment. The external tempo reflects internal coherence. When you live from the end, you are no longer projecting fulfillment into a distant future. You internalize it now. That internalization signals completion to your nervous system. The body relaxes. Decision-making clarifies. Action becomes precise rather than frantic. Those changes influence outcome far more than visible effort. Most believe that time heals. Time builds. Time changes. In truth, state heals. State builds. State changes. Time merely records the persistence of state. If you remain in a state of fear for years, time seems to confirm fear. If you remain in a state of confidence for months, time confirms confidence. Duration is not the cause. Consistency of identity is. When you accept that time is responsive, you stop fearing age or deadlines. You stop defining yourself by when something should have happened. You focus on who you are being now, because who you are being now determines what unfolds next. The present state is the only creative point. The past is fixed because you continue to reference it. The future is flexible because it is fed by current identity. There will be moments when external conditions seem unchanged, despite your inner shift. This is where discipline matters. If you revert to the old state because nothing has moved yet, you reinforce the old trajectory. If you remain anchored in the new identity regardless of temporary stillness, the trajectory adjusts. The mirror cannot reflect a new image until the projection stabilizes. Collapsing time is not forcing speed. It is eliminating contradiction. When you no longer oscillate between belief and doubt, between possession and longing, the pathway clears. Events organize in ways that may appear coincidental to others. To you, they feel natural. The bridge unfolds without strain. You are not bound to a timeline written by past decisions. You are bound only to the state you choose to occupy. The moment you redefine yourself, you are no longer walking the same path. You are standing in a different corridor of possibility. The external environment gradually aligns with that corridor. Stop measuring progress by the calendar. Measure it by stability of identity. If you are consistently the person who has already achieved, the calendar becomes irrelevant. The outcome becomes inevitable. Time is not your obstacle. It is your reflection. And reflection always follows state. You cannot carry an old identity into a new reality. Every transformation begins with the death of a former self-concept. If you attempt to create expansion while secretly clinging to who you used to be, the result will remain unstable. The outer world cannot sustain a version of you that you do not fully accept internally. Identity is the root. Behavior is the branch. Circumstance is the fruit. If the root remains unchanged, the fruit will resemble the past. Many attempt to modify behavior without redefining identity. They discipline themselves. They adjust routines. They force new actions. But underneath those efforts, they still see themselves as limited, unworthy, or behind. The old identity eventually reclaims control. The shift must occur at the level of I am, not I will become, not I am trying to be, but I am. The words I am are not casual. They are declarations of structure. What follows them organizes experience. If you say I am anxious, anxiety becomes natural. If you say I am unlucky, misfortune feels predictable. If you say I am capable, capacity expands. To change your reality, you must first change what you are willing to call yourself. If you desire leadership, you cannot secretly identify as invisible. If you desire influence, you cannot secretly identify as insignificant. If you desire freedom, you cannot identify as trapped. The internal contradiction weakens manifestation. There will be discomfort when releasing an old identity. Even painful identities provide familiarity. If you have defined yourself as the one who struggles, struggle becomes predictable. Letting go of that identity can feel uncertain. The mind may resist because it prefers familiarity over expansion. But familiarity is not destiny. It is habit. When you consciously choose a new identity, you step into unfamiliar territory. Thoughts may attempt to reference old evidence. Memories may surface to reinforce the former label. This is the threshold. If you retreat here, the old identity regains dominance. If you persist, the new identity stabilizes. The death of the old self does not require drama. It requires decision. You decide that the previous narrative is no longer authoritative. You stop introducing yourself internally as the version who failed, who was hurt, who was overlooked. You begin introducing yourself as the version who learned, who strengthened, who advanced. This is not denial of history. It is reinterpretation of it. The past does not define you unless you repeatedly identify with it. When you stop saying this is just who I am, you free yourself from repetition. Identity is not fixed. It is chosen and reinforced through attention. There will be external reminders of the old version. People may still address you through previous roles. Situations may echo familiar patterns. The temptation is to respond from the former identity. But every time you respond from the new identity, you weaken the old script. Persistence reshapes perception. If you identify as someone disciplined, you act with structure even when no one is watching. If you identify as someone worthy, you decline treatment that contradicts worth. If you identify as someone aligned, you trust intuition over fear. The actions follow naturally when identity is accepted. You do not wait to feel ready to become the new version. Readiness follows assumption. When you declare I am this now, you instruct the mind to search for coherence. Behavior aligns with identity. Opportunities that match identity become visible. Relationships that contradict identity dissolve. The world cannot maintain a stable reflection of an identity you have abandoned. It may attempt to present remnants, but without your internal agreement, they fade. Agreement is the key. If you secretly agree with the old label, it persists. If you withdraw agreement, it weakens. Identity determines what feels possible. If you identify as someone limited by circumstances, possibilities narrow. If you identify as someone evolving, possibilities expand. The difference is not environment, it is self-recognition. Becoming a new self is not gradual improvement of the old. It is a shift in self-recognition. You no longer say, I am becoming confident. You say, I am confident and allow behavior to adjust. You no longer say, I am trying to be successful. You say, I am successful and act accordingly. There will be a moment when the new identity feels natural, when you no longer rehearse it consciously, when reactions align without effort. That is stabilization. Once stabilized, reality reorganizes more quickly. Because there is no internal contradiction to delay expression, you cannot inhabit two identities simultaneously. One must dominate. If the old identity still defines your reactions, it remains active. If the new identity defines your reactions consistently, it becomes your lived experience. The old version of you was built from previous assumptions. The new version must be built from deliberate ones. Decide who you are now, not who you were, not who others labeled you, but who you choose to be. Identity precedes evidence, and once identity stabilizes, evidence follows. The old self must dissolve for the new self to stabilize. You cannot expand while protecting the identity that kept you confined. Transformation is not addition. It is subtraction. You subtract the assumptions that no longer serve the version you choose to become. Every identity is a structure of beliefs held together by repetition. If you have repeated for years that you are behind, incapable, unlucky, or overlooked, those repetitions have formed a stable structure. That structure feels real because it has been reinforced. But reinforcement does not equal truth. It equals consistency. When you decide to shift identity, you interrupt that consistency. The interruption creates friction. The mind prefers continuity. It resists discontinuity because continuity feels safe. Safety is not always growth. Many remain confined because confinement is familiar. Letting the old self dissolve means withdrawing emotional investment from it. You stop defending it. You stop explaining it. You stop justifying it. You no longer introduce yourself internally as the person shaped by disappointment. You stop rehearsing the story of how things have always been. The past is not your prison unless you continue to identify with it. Every memory gains power through repetition. If you repeatedly relive a failure, you reinforce the identity attached to it. If you reinterpret it as instruction rather than definition, you weaken its authority. The dissolution of the old self requires discipline of attention. When thoughts arise that align with the former identity, you do not indulge them. You do not argue aggressively either. You simply refuse to anchor in them. You return to the chosen self concept. Over time, the neural familiarity shifts. You may notice that others still respond to the old version. They may treat you according to who you were. This is expected. They are reacting to the prior projection. If you respond as the former self, you reactivate that identity. If you remain stable in the new identity, the interaction gradually recalibrates. There will be moments of uncertainty, when the old identity feels easier. When the new identity feels demanding, that is the threshold. If you retreat at that point, you confirm the former structure. If you persist, the discomfort fades and the new structure strengthens. You are not required to announce the shift. Identity does not need public declaration. It requires private conviction. When you internally accept, "I am this now," behavior adjusts, tone adjusts, posture adjusts, standards adjust. Those adjustments alter experience without effort. The old self is maintained by emotional attachment. You may have attached significance to being the one who struggles, the one who sacrifices, the one who is misunderstood. Letting that go may feel like losing part of yourself, but you are not losing yourself. You are releasing a role you rehearsed. Identity is not permanent. It is assumed, and what is assumed can be replaced. Replacement requires repetition of the new assumption. Each time you think from the new identity, you reinforce it. Each time you act from it, you stabilize it. Each time you refuse to return to the old narrative, you weaken it. There will be evidence from the environment that seems to validate the former self. This is the echo of prior projection. If you interpret it as confirmation that nothing changed, you reattach. If you interpret it as residue dissolving, you remain steady. Dissolution does not mean denial of lessons. It means detachment from limitation. You can acknowledge what occurred without defining yourself by it. You can recognize growth without clinging to pain. The new identity is not built on rejection of the past, but on refusal to be confined by it. Ask yourself what labels you have been carrying. Which of them were adopted unconsciously? Which of them were reinforced by repetition? And which of them no longer align with who you are choosing to be? Release them deliberately. Replace them consciously. If you identify as disciplined, you move differently. If you identify as resilient, Obstacles become instruction. If you identify as worthy, you stop negotiating your value. These shifts do not require external validation. They require internal agreement. You cannot become the next version while emotionally loyal to the previous one. Loyalty to limitation maintains limitation. Loyalty to expansion accelerates expansion. Choose where your loyalty rests. There is no transformation without surrender of the former self-concept. You do not drag it forward. You let it dissolve. You allow silence to replace its narrative. You allow certainty to replace its doubt. The new self does not need to fight the old. It outgrows it. As the new identity stabilizes, the old one loses relevance. It feels distant. It feels smaller. Eventually, it feels unfamiliar. You are not defined by who you were. You are defined by who you consistently assume yourself to be now. And as you withdraw energy from the old identity, it fades. What remains is the version aligned with your deliberate choice. The old self dissolves when you stop feeding it. The new self solidifies when you consistently inhabit it. Chaos is not punishment. It is transition. When you shift identity, the structure built around the former self begins to loosen. What feels like disruption is often reorganization. The outer world was arranged according to who you believed yourself to be. When that belief changes, the arrangement must adjust. Many become discouraged at this stage. They assume that difficulty means failure. They interpret instability as evidence that nothing worked. But instability is often proof that something did work. The old configuration cannot remain intact when the internal source has changed. If you have identified as small and suddenly assume expansion, the roles, environments, and patterns that sustain smallness may begin to dissolve. Conversations shift. Opportunities move. Certain relationships feel misaligned. This can feel uncomfortable, but discomfort does not equal error. It signals recalibration. The mind seeks stability. When familiar structures begin to break apart, fear may arise. The instinct is to retreat to what was known, but returning to the former state reinstates the former projection. If you persist in the new identity, the external must eventually stabilize around it. Chaos is not random. It is structured dissolution. When a building is renovated, dust appears before clarity. When identity changes, echoes of the old arrangement surface before the new alignment settles. If you misinterpret the dust as destruction, you interrupt the process. If you recognize it as transition, you remain steady. There will be moments when the environment seems less supportive than before. That does not mean you regressed. It may mean you outgrew the previous configuration. Growth often exposes incompatibilities. What once felt normal may now feel restrictive. This is not loss. It is differentiation. When you elevate your self-concept, certain dynamics cannot continue unchanged. If you assume worth, you cannot remain in spaces that reinforce inadequacy without discomfort. That discomfort is not punishment. It is awareness. Awareness precedes movement. The temptation during chaos is to search for immediate reassurance, to demand signs that the new identity is working, but reassurance sought from anxiety reactivates doubt. Stability comes from internal conviction, not from external proof. The external world may temporarily intensify contrast. Situations may appear that challenge your new assumption. This is not contradiction. It is exposure of residue. The former identity left impressions. As they surface, you have the opportunity to respond differently. Each new response strengthens the chosen self-concept. If you react from fear, you reattach to the old pattern. If you respond from certainty, you weaken it. The environment gradually reflects the dominant response. Persistence defines outcome. Do not interpret chaos as opposition. Interpret it as adjustment. The world is reorganizing around a different internal axis. Reorganization can feel disorienting, but disorientation is temporary. Stability returns when the new identity becomes consistent. There may be losses, loss of certain expectations, loss of particular roles, loss of dynamics that once defined you. These losses are not subtraction of value, they are removal of incompatibility. You cannot inhabit a larger identity while maintaining every attachment formed under a smaller one. Trust does not mean passivity, it means refusal to panic. When external movement feels unstable, return to the internal decision. Reaffirm who you are being. Act from that identity even when conditions lag. Growth rarely feels comfortable in the middle. It feels uncertain because you are between structures. The old has not fully dissolved. The new has not fully solidified. This in-between state is where many retreat. But retreat restores the former arrangement. Remain in the chosen state. Remain in the feeling of completion. Remain in the identity you declared. The outer turbulence will settle according to your internal stability. Chaos is not a signal to abandon transformation. It is evidence that transformation is active. When nothing changes externally, it may mean nothing shifted internally. When external rearrangement begins, it means the projection is updating. You do not measure success by temporary calm. You measure it by internal coherence. If you remain aligned with your new identity despite fluctuation, you are advancing. Eventually the dust clears. The new configuration stabilizes. What once felt unstable becomes normal. What once felt unfamiliar becomes natural. The environment aligns with your revised self-concept. Do not fear the shaking. It is not the end. It is restructuring. And restructuring is necessary when identity expands. Remain steady. The mirror is adjusting. Fear is the guardian at the threshold of expansion. It does not appear to stop you. It appears to test the stability of your new identity. Whenever you approach a higher version of yourself, fear intensifies. Not because you are wrong, but because you are crossing into unfamiliar territory. The mind is designed to preserve continuity. It prefers the known pattern, even if the known pattern is limiting. When you attempt to move beyond the boundaries of your former identity, the mind signals danger. It interprets unfamiliarity as threat. This is not evidence that you should retreat. It is evidence that you are advancing. Fear often disguises itself as logic. It presents scenarios of failure. It highlights past mistakes. It magnifies uncertainty. The content of the fear is less important than its timing. If fear increases when you move toward growth, you are at the threshold. Many misinterpret fear as intuition. They assume discomfort means misalignment. But fear is emotional resistance to identity expansion. Intuition is calm, clarity. Fear is loud urgency. Intuition is steady direction. Distinguishing between the two determines whether you progress or return. At the threshold, you will feel exposed. You may question your readiness. You may doubt your worthiness. This is the echo of the former identity attempting preservation. If you retreat now, you confirm that the old self remains dominant. If you move forward despite fear, you weaken its authority. Fear does not require elimination. It requires non-compliance. You do not need to suppress it. You acknowledge it without surrendering to it. You act from the chosen identity even while fear is present. Action aligned with identity dissolves fear over time. The greater the identity shift, the stronger the threshold. If you have defined yourself as invisible and you begin to step into visibility, fear will intensify. If you have defined yourself as cautious and you begin to take calculated risks, fear will amplify. This amplification is not warning. It is recalibration. When you approach a new level of responsibility, influence, or recognition, the mind may attempt to return you to familiarity. It may encourage procrastination. It may generate distraction. It may rationalize delay. All of these are forms of threshold resistance. You must understand that fear at this stage is a sign of expansion, not limitation. If there were no growth, there would be no fear. The threshold appears only when a boundary is being crossed. Do not wait for confidence to precede action. Confidence follows action taken from identity. When you repeatedly move forward while fear whispers, fear loses its persuasive power. The nervous system adapts. What once felt overwhelming becomes normal. There will be moments when the urge to retreat feels convincing. You may long for the comfort of the old pattern, but comfort is not the same as alignment. Comfort often belongs to the previous identity. Alignment belongs to the chosen one. If you define yourself as capable, you act as capable even when doubt appears. If you define yourself as worthy, you step forward even when insecurity surfaces. The threshold does not vanish before you move. It dissolves because you move. Every expansion requires a crossing. The crossing feels unstable because it disrupts familiarity. But familiarity is not the measure of truth. Identity is. If you have chosen a higher identity, you must behave in accordance with it before evidence arrives. Fear may attempt to convince you that you are not ready, but readiness is not a feeling. It is a decision. When you decide who you are, you act from that definition. The body may tremble, the mind may question, but the decision remains. Threshold moments often precede breakthrough. Many abandon the new identity just before stabilization. They interpret resistance as defeat. In reality, resistance often indicates that the former structure is weakening. Observe when fear appears. Does it appear when you remain small? Or does it appear when you stretch beyond limitation? The pattern reveals its purpose. Fear guards expansion, not stagnation. You are not meant to eliminate fear before progressing. You are meant to progress through it. Each time you do, the identity strengthens. The threshold becomes less intimidating. Expansion becomes familiar. The guardian at the threshold is not your enemy. It is a signal that the next version of you is close. If you retreat, you reinforce the previous boundary. If you step forward, the boundary dissolves. Do not negotiate with fear. Do not attempt to silence it with argument. Simply act from who you have chosen to be. Action aligned with identity restructures perception. Fear gradually transforms into capacity. You are not blocked. You are being tested at the edge of expansion. And expansion belongs to those who move despite discomfort. The threshold is temporary. Identity is enduring. Your words are not casual expressions. They are structural commands. Every time you speak after the phrase, "I am," you are issuing a creative instruction. You may think language is descriptive, but in truth it is generative. It does not merely describe your state. It stabilizes it. The identity you verbalize repeatedly becomes the identity you inhabit. Most people use language unconsciously. They say, "I am tired. I am unlucky. I am bad with money. I am not good at relationships." They believe they are describing temporary conditions, but the subconscious mind does not process language as temporary unless you define it that way. It registers repetition as truth. What you declare consistently becomes normalized internally. What becomes normalized internally becomes expressed externally. The words "I am" precede experience. If you say, "I am overwhelmed," the body responds with tension. Perception narrows. Opportunities feel heavy. If you say, "I am capable," posture adjusts. Focus sharpens. Choices expand. The external world then mirrors the state reinforced by language. You are not merely speaking about reality. You are reinforcing the identity that shapes it. The subconscious does not evaluate sarcasm. It does not filter exaggeration. It accepts dominant repetition. If you repeatedly joke about being unlucky, the identity of being unlucky stabilizes. If you repeatedly describe yourself as behind, your nervous system aligns with deficiency. Over time, the pattern appears natural. You then call it personality. Language is a bridge between thought and embodiment. Thoughts may pass quickly, but spoken declarations anchor them. When you verbalize identity, you increase emotional intensity. Emotional intensity accelerates stabilization. This is why careless self-description becomes dangerous. You are not just venting. You are programming. To change your life, you must audit your language. Observe how you introduce yourself internally and externally. Do you describe yourself as anxious? Do you describe yourself as unlucky? Do you describe yourself as struggling? Each repetition strengthens the corresponding state. This does not mean suppressing honest awareness. It means choosing alignment. If you are experiencing challenge, you can say, "I am learning discipline," instead of "I am failing." You can say, "I am strengthening," instead of "I am weak." The difference is subtle in wording but decisive in identity. The subconscious responds to consistency, not volume. You do not need to shout declarations. You need to repeat aligned identity calmly and steadily. When you say I am confident and act accordingly, the nervous system adapts. When you say I am stable and choose stable decisions, the state solidifies. Many attempt to use affirmations without embodiment. They repeat phrases while internally contradicting them. The contradiction weakens impact. For language to create, it must align with chosen identity. When you say I am capable, you must behave in a way that confirms capability. Action reinforces declaration. Declaration stabilizes action. Words also shape how others perceive you. If you consistently minimize yourself in conversation, others internalize that framing. If you speak with certainty about who you are, others respond to that framing. You train perception through language. You define the lens through which you are seen. Complaining is also declaration. When you repeat what is wrong without redefining identity, you anchor yourself to what you describe. You rehearse limitation. The subconscious registers repetition without distinction between complaint and intention. If you speak constantly about lack, lack becomes familiar. Familiarity breeds manifestation. Silence can be powerful when identity is unstable. Instead of reinforcing the old self through careless speech, you choose restraint. You avoid labeling yourself negatively. You protect the emerging identity by refusing to verbalize contradiction. As the new self-concept strengthens, language aligns naturally. Gratitude is another structural declaration. When you speak appreciation from a state of possession rather than desperation, you affirm sufficiency. Sufficiency signals completion. Completion reduces resistance. Resistance reduction accelerates alignment. Be precise with the phrase, I am. It is not decoration. It is foundation. After it, you place the blueprint. If you say I am evolving, you open trajectory. If you say I am disciplined, you shape behavior. If you say I am resilient, you reinterpret obstacles as training. Your vocabulary reveals your self-concept. If you consistently describe situations as overwhelming, life feels heavy. If you consistently describe them as challenging but manageable, life feels navigable. Language guides interpretation. Interpretation guides emotion. Emotion guides action. Action shapes outcome. Do not underestimate casual speech. Identity is maintained by repetition. Even subtle, self-diminishing statements reinforce limitation. Replace them deliberately. Not artificially. Deliberately, speak as the version of you who has already integrated the new state. The subconscious does not argue with your words. It accepts the dominant narrative. If you want a different narrative externally, redefine it internally and verbally. Speak from identity, not from insecurity. Speak from completion, not from absence. You are constantly declaring who you are. Make those declarations intentional, because language is not merely communication. It is construction. Your subconscious mind is not a critic. It is a servant. It does not argue. It does not evaluate morality. It does not distinguish between imagination and physical fact. It accepts what is impressed upon it with feeling and repetition. It takes your dominant assumptions as instruction and organizes perception and behavior accordingly. Whether you consciously intend it or not, it is always executing the identity you reinforce. The subconscious does not respond to occasional desire. It responds to sustained belief. If you repeatedly imagine failure, even casually, it normalizes that possibility. If you repeatedly imagine confidence and stability, it begins aligning internal responses to match that state. It cannot tell the difference between what you vividly imagine and what you physically experience. To it, both are impressions. This is why careless mental rehearsal becomes dangerous. If you replay arguments in your mind, your body reacts as though they are occurring. If you anticipate rejection repeatedly, your nervous system prepares for it. Preparation influences tone, posture, and decision-making. Behavior then invites confirmation. You call it coincidence. It is coherence between subconscious programming and external reaction. Your subconscious is most impressionable when emotion is strong. Fear, anger, shame, excitement, and gratitude all intensify imprinting. If you repeatedly feel shame while thinking about money, you associate money with discomfort. If you repeatedly feel gratitude while imagining stability, you associate stability with safety. The subconscious then seeks conditions consistent with those emotional pairings. It is not concerned with fairness. It is concerned with consistency. If you identify as someone who struggles, it will generate thoughts and impulses aligned with struggle. If you identify as someone who succeeds, it will guide attention toward opportunities rather than obstacles. It is not mystical. It is structural. The subconscious influences perception by filtering information out of countless stimuli. You notice what aligns with your dominant identity. If you assume scarcity, you notice lack. If you assume opportunity, you notice openings. The environment may remain the same, but your focus shifts. Focus determines interpretation. Interpretation determines experience. Many attempt to change results without addressing subconscious belief. They consciously state new goals while unconsciously rehearsing old fears. This internal contradiction slows manifestation. The conscious mind sets intention. The subconscious mind executes identity. Identity prevails. To reprogram the subconscious, repetition must be calm and consistent. You do not force it with tension. You impress it through familiarity. When you repeatedly enter the state of fulfillment before sleep, when the mind is relaxed and receptive, you strengthen the new pattern. The relaxed state reduces resistance. The subconscious absorbs what feels natural. Visualization is effective not because images are magical, but because they evoke feeling. When you imagine an outcome vividly and pair it with emotional certainty, the subconscious treats it as instruction. The more natural the scene feels, the deeper the imprint. Naturalness signals acceptance. Affirmations are effective when spoken with embodiment. If you say, "I am stable," and act in alignment with stability, you reinforce coherence. If you say, "I am confident," while behaving hesitantly, the subconscious registers inconsistency. Behavior must support declaration. The subconscious learns through repetition of aligned action. The inner dialogue you carry throughout the day also imprints. If your mental commentary is critical, your identity stabilizes around inadequacy. If your mental commentary is constructive, your identity stabilizes around growth. You are always instructing the subconscious through attention. Complaints are also instructions. When you repeat what is wrong without redefining self-concept, you anchor yourself to the state that produced it. The subconscious does not hear complaint as resistance. It hears repetition as command. If you constantly say, "Nothing works for me," it aligns perception to confirm that belief. To shift programming, you must choose the identity deliberately and repeat it until it feels familiar. Familiarity is key. The subconscious gravitates toward what feels known. If insecurity has been rehearsed for years, confidence will feel foreign initially. Persistence transforms foreign into familiar. There will be moments when old programming surfaces automatically. A thought of doubt may arise before you consciously intervene. Do not panic. Recognition itself is progress. Instead of indulging the old narrative, you redirect attention to the chosen identity. Over time, the new pattern becomes default. The subconscious does not require perfection. It requires dominance. The dominant emotional pattern wins. If you dwell more often in certainty than in fear, certainty gradually defines identity. If you dwell more often in gratitude than in resentment, gratitude shapes perception. Your subconscious is loyal. It serves whatever identity you feed it. If you feed it limitation, it builds limitation. If you feed it expansion, it builds expansion. It does not question your worth. It executes your assumption. You are not battling an external force. You are instructing an internal mechanism. Treat it with awareness. Speak to it through repetition of aligned thought and action. Enter the state of fulfillment frequently. Allow it to become normal. The subconscious is not your obstacle. It is your amplifier. It magnifies what you impress upon it. Choose carefully what you impress. Persistence is the proof of identity. Anyone can assume a new state briefly. Few remain in it long enough for the outer world to reorganize. The difference between desire and embodiment is duration. If you return to the former self-concept at the first sign of delay, you confirm that the old identity still holds authority. Persistence is not forcing results. It is remaining loyal to the chosen self-concept despite temporary contradiction. When you assume a new identity, the external world does not always shift instantly. There is often a period where nothing appears to change. This period is not stagnation, it is stabilization. The inner shift must become dominant before it is mirrored consistently. If you fluctuate between belief and doubt, the reflection fluctuates as well. Many abandon transformation because they expect immediate confirmation. They treat absence of evidence as evidence of absence. But manifestation is not performance. It is alignment. Alignment requires repetition. The more consistently you think, feel, and act from the new identity, the more natural it becomes. Naturalness reduces resistance. Reduced resistance accelerates reflection. Persistence is quiet. It does not argue with circumstances. It does not react emotionally to delay. It simply remains. If you have decided that you are stable, you remain stable, even when instability appears. If you have decided that you are worthy, you remain worthy even when someone fails to recognize it. Identity is not dependent on external validation. It is internal agreement. There will be moments when doubt resurfaces. Old thoughts may attempt to re-enter. The mind may say, this is not working. This is too slow. Nothing has changed. That is the moment persistence matters most. If you entertain those thoughts repeatedly, you revive the former identity. If you observe them without attachment and return to the chosen state, you weaken their influence. Persistence is not emotional intensity. It is consistency. You do not need dramatic motivation. You need steady alignment. When you wake each day and reaffirm who you are being, you strengthen coherence. When you make decisions aligned with that identity, you reinforce it. Each small act compounds. External reality reflects dominant assumption, not occasional optimism. If you feel confident for 1 hour and doubtful for 10, doubt dominates. If you feel worthy for a moment but rehearse insecurity repeatedly, insecurity stabilizes. Persistence ensures that the chosen identity becomes dominant rather than temporary. There may be external tests. Situations may arise that seem designed to provoke the old reaction. This is not punishment. It is opportunity. If you respond from the former identity, the pattern continues. If you respond from the new identity, the pattern weakens. Each response shapes future reflection. Do not confuse persistence with strain. Strain implies force. Persistence implies stability. You are not trying to convince reality. You are remaining faithful to your internal decision. Reality adjusts in response to sustained coherence. Some days alignment will feel effortless. Other days it will require awareness. That fluctuation is normal. What matters is the overall direction. If your baseline gradually shifts toward the new identity, manifestation becomes inevitable. Time is not the measure. Stability is. You may not see visible evidence immediately, but internal consistency is already altering perception and behavior. Opportunities begin to appear differently. Conversations shift subtly. You notice openings you once ignored. Persistence sharpens attention. Impatience often signals lingering attachment to the old timeline. If you truly believed the outcome was inevitable, urgency would fade. You would move steadily rather than anxiously. Persistence transforms urgency into certainty. Every major transformation in your life required repetition. Skills strengthened through practice. Habits solidified through repetition. Identity operates the same way. Repeated alignment forms structure. Structure supports manifestation. When you feel tempted to give up, remember that giving up is also persistence. It is persistence in the old identity. If you persist in doubt, doubt stabilizes. If you persist in belief, belief stabilizes. The mind cannot serve two masters simultaneously. One pattern becomes dominant. Persistence is not glamorous. It is disciplined. It is the quiet refusal to return to the former self-concept. It is the decision to remain who you chose to be, even when circumstances lag. It is the understanding that internal coherence precedes external confirmation. You do not measure progress by visible change. You measure it by how naturally you inhabit the new identity. When the new state feels ordinary, manifestation accelerates. When confidence feels normal rather than forced, alignment deepens. Remain steady, remain aligned, remain consistent. The mirror responds to what is stable, not to what is sporadic. Identity solidifies through repetition. Reflection follows solidification. Persistence is not about making something happen. It is about remaining who you decided to be until reality has no option but to agree. Detachment is not indifference. It is stability. When you truly assume the wish fulfilled, you no longer cling to outcomes. Clinging signals doubt. Clinging signals that you still perceive distance between you and the desire. Detachment emerges naturally when identity stabilizes. You do not detach by force. You detach because you know. Attachment is rooted in fear of loss. It asks, what if this does not happen? What if it disappears? What if I fail? These questions reveal that the state of possession is not yet dominant. When you live from the end, the need to control fades. Control attempts to secure what feels uncertain. Certainty eliminates the need for control. Most people attempt to manifest while constantly checking progress. They monitor signs. They analyze silence. They interpret every delay as a signal. This behavior reinforces absence. If you believed something was already yours, you would not search for confirmation. You would move calmly. You would act normally. You would rest in inevitability. Detachment is quiet confidence. It does not chase. It does not over-explain. It does not beg. When you assume you are valued, you do not over-invest in proving it. When you assume you are supported, you do not obsess over minor fluctuations. When you assume stability, you do not panic at temporary shifts. The paradox is that outcomes appear more easily when you stop gripping them. Gripping implies fear. Fear distorts perception. Distorted perception leads to reactive behavior. Reactive behavior reinforces instability. Detachment interrupts this cycle. To detach does not mean you no longer desire. It means you no longer need constant reassurance. Desire remains, but it is calm. It is integrated. It feels aligned rather than desperate. Desperation repels because it signals incompletion. Calm attraction aligns because it signals fulfillment. When you detach from outcome, you focus on identity. Instead of asking, when will this happen? You ask, who am I being? Instead of asking, why is it delayed? You ask, am I consistent in state? This shift restores control to the only place it belongs, your internal alignment. Attachment often creates overcorrection. You send another message. You adjust your tone excessively. You force decisions prematurely. All of this arises from anxiety. Anxiety communicates lack. Lack invites confirmation of lack. Detachment allows space for natural unfolding. When you no longer interfere with fear-driven action, the bridge of events forms smoothly. Conversations align organically. Opportunities appear without strain. The absence of tension creates clarity. There will be moments when attachment resurfaces. You may feel the urge to check, to confirm, to control. Recognize it without judgment. Attachment is simply a signal that identity is not fully stabilized. Return to the feeling of possession. Remind yourself that what is assumed as done requires no surveillance. Detachment also protects emotional balance. When you are attached, minor disruptions feel catastrophic. When you are detached, you remain composed. Composition preserves clarity. Clarity guides effective action. Effective action reinforces identity. You cannot simultaneously cling and trust. Trust implies internal agreement that the outcome aligns with your state. If you have chosen the identity of someone who succeeds, you do not monitor success anxiously. You expect it. Expectation reduces urgency. Detachment transforms how you interpret silence. Silence is no longer rejection. Delay is no longer failure. Contrast is no longer opposition. Everything becomes part of unfolding rather than threat to fulfillment. When you detach, you stop bargaining with reality. You stop asking for signs. You stop testing the process. Testing implies disbelief. Belief remains steady without constant evaluation. The deeper your detachment, the stronger your confidence. Confidence is not loud. It is grounded. It does not fluctuate with temporary appearance. It is anchored in identity rather than circumstance. Detachment also prevents over-identification with one specific pathway. When you are attached to a single form, you restrict possibility. When you are detached from form but attached to identity, manifestation can arrive through multiple channels. You allow flexibility without compromising outcome. If you truly believe something is yours, you do not chase it. You prepare for it. You embody it. You expect it. Expectation without anxiety is detachment. The final shift in manifestation is this release of grasping. You have assumed the state. You have embodied the identity. Now you remain steady without forcing timeline. This steadiness communicates completion. Detachment is not giving up. It is giving over. It is trusting that identity governs outcome. It is resting in the knowledge that what aligns with who you are must unfold. When you detach from fear, you attach to certainty, and certainty stabilizes reality. Revision is the correction of the past in order to reshape the future. What you accept as memory becomes part of your identity. What becomes part of your identity influences expectation. Expectation shapes experience. If you continue to replay the past as failure, rejection, or limitation, you reinforce the identity attached to those memories. That identity then projects similar outcomes forward. The past is not active because it happened. It is active because you rehearse it. Memory is not fixed destiny. It is a story you continue to tell. The subconscious does not distinguish between actual event and vividly imagined event. If you revisit a painful memory repeatedly with the same emotion, you strengthen its imprint. If you revise it with a different interpretation and feeling, you weaken its hold. Revision is not denial. It is redirection. You are not pretending something different occurred in physical terms. You are altering the emotional meaning attached to it. Meaning determines identity. Identity determines future manifestation. If you reinterpret a past failure as instruction rather than proof of inadequacy, you shift the identity built upon it. Most people carry emotional residue from earlier experiences. A single rejection becomes evidence of unworthiness. A financial mistake becomes identity as irresponsible. A conflict becomes identity as difficult. These labels persist because they are repeated internally. Repetition stabilizes self-concept. When you revise, you return to the memory in imagination and reshape it. You imagine the outcome aligned with the identity you now choose. You feel the relief, the dignity, the success that corresponds to your new self-concept. The subconscious registers the revised scene as impression. Over time, the emotional charge of the original memory diminishes. This process matters because unresolved emotion anchors you to former identity. If you still feel resentment when recalling someone, that resentment reinforces a version of you defined by that interaction. When you revise the memory and release the emotional charge, you detach from that identity. Revision also prevents repetition of patterns. If you repeatedly replay a betrayal with pain and anger, you normalize betrayal internally. The subconscious aligns perception to confirm that expectation. If you revise the memory with understanding and strength, you shift expectation toward respect. The key is feeling. If you revise intellectually without emotional shift, the imprint remains unchanged. When you vividly imagine the corrected outcome and feel its reality, the subconscious integrates it. Integration alters baseline expectation. You may question whether this changes facts. Facts remain recorded externally, but their power in shaping identity diminishes. What shapes the future is not the objective record. It is the subjective interpretation. Change the interpretation, and you alter trajectory. Many live as though the past is permanent authority. They say this happened to me, therefore I am this. But the past is a sequence of states you once occupied. If you occupy a different state now, you are not obligated to carry former interpretation. Revision frees you from unconscious loyalty to limitation. You are not required to remain the person shaped by yesterday's perspective. You can reinterpret events in a way that aligns with growth rather than stagnation. There will be resistance at first. The mind may insist that the original memory is accurate and cannot be altered. But accuracy is not the point. Identity is. You are not rewriting history for others. You are revising it within your own consciousness to align with who you are choosing to become. As you revise repeatedly, you notice emotional neutrality replacing tension. What once triggered discomfort becomes calm. That calm signals release. Release weakens attachment to former identity. Revision also builds confidence. When you see that memory can shift in meaning, you recognize that identity is flexible. You are no longer confined by narrative. You are author. Use revision deliberately. At the end of the day, if an interaction felt misaligned, revisit it in imagination. See yourself responding from the identity you prefer. Hear the tone you would choose. Feel the composure you claim. Impress that version upon the subconscious before sleep. Over time, the revised response becomes natural in real situations. You are not condemned by past reaction. You can alter the imprint before it solidifies into pattern. What you revise internally influences what repeats externally. The past is not the source of limitation. Identification with the past is. When you revise identification, you loosen its authority. The future begins to reflect the updated interpretation. Revision is forgiveness at the level of identity. It frees you from emotional loyalty to a smaller version of yourself. It allows you to step forward without carrying unnecessary weight. You are not the sum of events that occurred. You are the sum of meanings you continue to assign. Change the meaning, and you change direction. The past only persists because you persist in repeating it. Revise it, and you reclaim authorship of what comes next. Silence is power when identity is stable. When you truly know who you are being, you do not need to convince anyone. You do not need to defend every action. You do not need to explain every decision. Explanation often signals doubt. Defense often signals insecurity. Silence, grounded in certainty, communicates more than argument ever could. Most people speak from reaction. They respond immediately to criticism. They justify themselves at the first sign of misunderstanding. They attempt to correct perception through words alone. But perception is shaped by state, not by explanation. If your identity is unstable, no amount of argument will create respect. If your identity is stable, respect forms without persuasion. Silence is not suppression. It is control. It is the decision not to leak energy through unnecessary reaction. When someone questions you, you do not rush to prove yourself. When someone doubts you, you do not collapse into defense. You remain steady because your self-concept is not determined by their opinion. Reaction feeds instability. Every time you overreact, you signal attachment. Attachment reveals insecurity. Insecurity invites further challenge. Silence breaks this cycle. When you remain composed, you alter the dynamic. Others feel the steadiness even if they cannot explain it. Silence also protects the emerging identity. When you are still stabilizing a new self-concept, excessive discussion can weaken it. If you speak too soon about what you are building, you expose it to external skepticism before it feels natural internally. Protect the seed until it roots deeply. You do not need public validation for private transformation. The more you anchor internally, the less you seek applause. Applause is temporary. Identity is structural. If you define yourself by reaction from others, your stability fluctuates with their approval. Silence creates observation. When you are not busy defending yourself, you can observe patterns clearly. You see who respects boundaries. You see who attempts to provoke reaction. You see where alignment exists and where it does not. Reaction clouds perception. Silence sharpens it. There will be moments when silence feels uncomfortable. The urge to respond will surface. The mind may say you must correct this now, but ask yourself whether the response is necessary or emotional. If it arises from ego protection, it reinforces the old identity. If it arises from clarity, it will be calm and concise. Powerful communication is minimal and precise. It does not ramble. It does not over-explain. It states and rests. Rest signals confidence. Over-explanation signals doubt. When you adopt silence strategically, you conserve energy. Energy conserved strengthens presence. Presence influences outcome. The person who is internally settled does not need to dominate conversation. Their steadiness commands attention without effort. Silence also dissolves unnecessary conflict. Many disagreements escalate because of reactive words. When you withhold reaction, escalation loses fuel. You are not required to participate in every argument. You are not required to answer every accusation. Choosing when to speak is strength. Silence is especially powerful when you are living from the end. If you have assumed success, you do not argue with temporary contradiction. You allow results to speak. You let consistency replace explanation. When identity is firm, proof unfolds naturally. There is a difference between avoidance and composure. Avoidance hides from confrontation. Composure chooses response deliberately. Silence grounded in fear is weakness. Silence grounded in certainty is authority. When you stop reacting impulsively, others adjust. They cannot predict you through emotional pattern. Predictability often invites manipulation. Stability disrupts manipulation. Calm reduces control from external forces. You will notice that as your identity strengthens, the need to speak diminishes. You no longer attempt to win arguments to validate yourself. You no longer chase understanding from those unwilling to see. You recognize that your state determines your experience more than their opinion. Silence also allows intuition to surface. When you are not busy filling space with defense, clarity emerges. Decisions become sharper. Words become intentional. Reaction fades. The more stable your self-concept, the less noise you require. Noise compensates for insecurity. Stillness reflects certainty. The individual who knows who they are does not need constant confirmation. Let results replace explanation. Let consistency replace persuasion. Let composure replace reaction. Silence does not mean passivity. It means alignment without leakage. When you choose silence from strength, you reinforce your identity internally. You prove to yourself that you are not dependent on external approval. That internal proof builds authority. You are not obligated to answer every challenge. You are not required to defend every perception. You are only responsible for maintaining the state you chose. Silence becomes natural when identity stabilizes. It becomes unnecessary to argue with reflection. You adjust the source and allow the mirror to update. Power speaks softly. Confidence does not shout. When you know, you do not explain. You embody. Faith is not belief without evidence. Faith is identity without proof. It is the ability to remain aligned with the chosen state before the mirror reflects it. If you require visible confirmation before stabilizing internally, you remain dependent on effect. Faith reverses that dependency. It declares that the internal decision is sufficient. Most people think faith is emotional intensity. It is not intensity. It is steadiness. It is the quiet refusal to return to the former identity when appearances contradict you. When nothing seems to move, faith remains unmoved. When circumstances fluctuate, faith remains centered. Faith begins where logic ends. Logic references the past. It measures probability based on previous experience. Faith references identity. It measures possibility based on chosen state. If you allow logic built from old identity to dominate, you limit expansion. If you allow identity to define expectation, you transcend repetition. There will be moments when external reality appears unchanged. Silence may stretch. Progress may seem invisible. Doubt may whisper that nothing is happening. This is the moment faith becomes structural. If you retreat into former assumptions, you reinforce delay. If you remain aligned internally, you strengthen inevitability. Faith is not passive waiting. It is active embodiment. You continue to act, decide, and move from the identity you assumed. You do not freeze until proof arrives. You live as though it is already true. That living from the end is faith in motion. The bridge of events is often invisible until completed. You may not see how circumstances are rearranging. You may not understand how conversations are aligning behind the scenes. Faith allows you to proceed without needing to see every step. It trusts coherence. Impatience reveals conditional belief. If you say, "I believe," but only if it happens soon, belief remains fragile. Faith does not set ultimatums. It remains aligned regardless of timeline. Timeline is secondary to identity. Faith also dissolves fear. Fear questions outcome. Faith affirms identity. When identity is secure, fear loses dominance. You no longer interpret delay as rejection. You interpret it as unfolding. There will be days when confidence feels effortless, and days when doubt resurfaces. Faith does not eliminate doubt instantly. It overrides it through consistency. When doubt appears, you do not argue aggressively. You reaffirm who you are being. You return to the feeling of completion. Faith requires discipline of attention. If you constantly consume narratives of limitation, you weaken alignment. If you reinforce narratives of expansion, you strengthen it. What you dwell on emotionally becomes your dominant state. You may be tempted to seek reassurance from others. You may want someone to confirm that you are on the right path. But external reassurance is unstable. If identity depends on it, it fluctuates. Faith is self-anchored. It rests in internal conviction rather than external applause. When you assume you are successful, faith prevents overreaction to temporary setback. When you assume you are worthy, faith prevents collapse at minor rejection. Faith stabilizes interpretation. Interpretation shapes emotional response. Emotional response influences outcome. Many abandon transformation just before evidence appears. They mistake silence for failure. They mistake delay for denial. Faith recognizes that manifestation often reorganizes invisibly before appearing visibly. You are not required to know how something will occur. You are required to remain who you chose to be. The how belongs to the bridge. The identity belongs to you. Faith transforms reaction into composure. Instead of asking, "Why has nothing happened?" you ask, "Am I still aligned?" Instead of seeking proof, you strengthen state. This shift keeps you in authorship rather than victimhood. If you truly believed something was inevitable, your behavior would reflect calm certainty. You would not chase. You would not panic. You would not collapse. That calm is faith embodied. Faith is not blind optimism. It is disciplined consistency. It is the refusal to contradict your chosen identity because of temporary appearance. It is the recognition that internal stability precedes external reflection. When you stabilize faith, you detach from emotional volatility. You no longer interpret every fluctuation as final outcome. You understand that dominant state determines direction. Faith is quiet power. It does not shout. It does not argue. It remains. The mirror cannot deny sustained identity. It may delay reflection, but it cannot resist it indefinitely. Faith ensures you remain aligned long enough for reflection to occur. You are not hoping. You are embodying. You are not waiting. You are stabilizing. Faith is the bridge between assumption and manifestation. Without it, you return to doubt. With it, inevitability strengthens. Remain steady. Remain aligned. Remain faithful to the identity you chose. The reflection will follow. You are not manifesting a new life. You are revealing the one already aligned with your identity. Creation is not addition. It is selection. At every moment you are selecting a version of reality that corresponds to the state you occupy. When you change the state, you select differently. The external world then rearranges to match the internal choice. Most people believe they must build everything from nothing. They assume effort alone generates results. Effort matters, but effort directed from unstable identity produces inconsistent outcomes. Identity is the filter through which effort operates. If you identify as limited, effort reinforces struggle. If you identify as capable, effort compounds progress. Selection happens quietly. You wake up and interpret events through a lens shaped by your self-concept. If you assume support, you notice cooperation. If you assume resistance, you notice opposition. Both versions of reality exist as possibility. The one you select is determined by identity. You are not trapped by circumstances. You are aligned with them. Alignment is not blame. It is coherence. Circumstances mirror dominant state. When you shift state, you do not fight circumstance. You move into a different alignment. The new alignment gradually replaces the old. Every moment contains multiple pathways. A single conversation can escalate or resolve depending on your state. A single opportunity can be dismissed or embraced depending on your belief. Identity determines interpretation. Interpretation determines action. Action selects outcome. You do not need to force transformation. You need to embody selection. If you decide that you are someone who thrives, you begin to select thoughts consistent with thriving. You decline narratives that reinforce defeat. You adjust habits that contradict expansion. These small selections accumulate. Most people attempt to change outcomes while retaining the same internal narrative. They say, "I want more," but rehearse lack. They say, "I want success," but rehearse inadequacy. The contradiction prevents coherent selection. When narrative aligns with desire, coherence strengthens. Selection requires awareness. Without awareness, you default to previous programming. With awareness, you intervene. When an old thought appears, you choose whether to reinforce it or replace it. Each replacement strengthens the new identity. There is no neutral state. You are always selecting. Even in hesitation, you select stagnation. Even in doubt, you select delay. Even in confidence, you select acceleration. Selection is continuous. If you want different outcomes, examine what you are consistently selecting emotionally. Are you selecting worry repeatedly? Are you selecting resentment repeatedly? Or are you selecting stability and gratitude? Repetition defines dominance. Selection also applies to relationships. You select the role you play in every interaction. If you assume inferiority, you select dynamics that confirm it. If you assume equality, you select interactions aligned with respect. The other person responds within the framework you project. This is why identity precedes strategy. Strategy without aligned identity collapses under pressure. Identity sustains direction, even when strategy adjusts. When you identify as adaptable, obstacles become adjustment rather than defeat. Selection becomes easier when identity stabilizes. You no longer debate every choice anxiously. You move from baseline certainty. That certainty filters options quickly. You decline what contradicts your chosen state without emotional turmoil. There will be moments when old selection patterns attempt to resurface. A familiar fear may tempt you to choose caution over growth. A familiar resentment may tempt you to react defensively. Awareness allows interruption. Interruption allows redirection. Selection is not dramatic. It is cumulative. The person you become is shaped by thousands of small internal decisions. Each aligned decision reinforces the chosen self-concept. Over time, the new state feels natural. Naturalness accelerates reflection. You are not waiting for opportunity to arrive randomly. You are aligning with opportunity through state. Opportunity often appears ordinary. Identity determines whether you recognize it. If you identify as unprepared, you overlook openings. If you identify as ready, you step forward. Stop thinking in terms of forcing change. Think in terms of selecting identity. Once identity stabilizes, choices align automatically. Alignment shapes outcome. You do not control every external variable. You control internal alignment. Alignment selects trajectory. Trajectory determines experience. Every day you wake and choose who you are being. That choice selects the version of reality you step into. You are not powerless in this process. You are central to it. Select deliberately. Reinforce consistently. Allow reflection to follow. The life you experience is the one you continue to choose through identity. You were never powerless. You were unaware. The world you experienced was not random, not cruel, not selectively biased against you. It was structured. It was coherent. It reflected the identity you carried quietly within. Every reaction, every delay, every opportunity, every loss moved in alignment with what you accepted as true about yourself. Now you know the structure. You know that assumption precedes experience. You know that feeling stabilizes identity. You know that identity selects reality. This knowledge is not theory. It is responsibility. Once you recognize that you are the operant power, You can no longer return to unconscious living without feeling the cost. You are not here to chase outcomes. You are here to embody identity. When you embody identity, outcomes reorganize naturally. When you chase outcomes without shifting identity, frustration repeats. The difference between struggle and alignment is internal coherence. You have moved through awareness of assumption, feeling, persistence, detachment, revision, faith, silence, gratitude, selection. None of these are separate techniques. They are expressions of one truth. Consciousness creates, identity directs, reality reflects. The old version of you believed the mirror initiated events. The new version understands the mirror responds. The old version reacted. The new version chooses state. The old version waited for proof. The new version embodies before proof appears. There will still be movement. There will still be contrast. Life does not become static, but contrast no longer defines you. It informs you. When something appears misaligned, you adjust internally rather than collapse externally. This is mastery. You no longer need to ask, why is this happening to me? You ask, who am I being? That question returns you to authorship instantly. It prevents victimhood. It restores alignment. You are not meant to memorize these principles. You are meant to live them. Each morning you wake and choose identity. Each interaction becomes opportunity to reinforce state. Each challenge becomes reminder to remain aligned. You do not need to announce your transformation. The reflection will announce it. Results speak without argument. Stability communicates without noise. Confidence expresses without explanation. There will be moments when the old pattern attempts to reappear. Familiar doubt may whisper. Familiar fear may surface. This is not regression. It is invitation to reaffirm identity. Each reaffirmation strengthens foundation. You are not required to be perfect. You are required to be consistent. Dominant state shapes direction. If you return to alignment more often than you retreat into doubt, the trajectory remains forward. Stop seeking permission from circumstances. Stop measuring yourself by delay. Stop negotiating with old narratives. The only authority that defines your experience is the identity you accept. You are not building a future. You are selecting it through state. You are not hoping for change. You are embodying it. The shift is internal first. The mirror has no choice but to follow sustained identity. Every chapter of your life was shaped by assumption, whether conscious or unconscious. Now you choose consciously. That choice alone alters trajectory. Remain steady in the end. Feel from completion. Speak from certainty. Act from alignment. Detach from anxiety. Persist without strain. Revise without resentment. Move through fear. Select deliberately. Trust without timeline. The process is simple. It is not always easy, but simplicity is strength. When identity stabilizes, complexity dissolves. You are the source. You are the selector. You are the projector. The world responds accordingly. Do not return to smaller self-concepts out of familiarity. Expansion is available. Identity determines access. Choose deliberately and remain loyal to that choice. There is no external force deciding your worth. There is no hidden authority limiting your possibility. There is only consciousness expressing through assumption. Stand firm in who you have chosen to be. Let the reflection adjust. Let results unfold. Let silence carry confidence. Let faith stabilize expectation. The life you experience next will not be random. It will be aligned. You are not becoming. You are being. And what you are being now determines everything that follows.